reached over a couple 100,000 people. We've built a list of over 200,000 people. We've done tons of outreach working with wonderful operatives like Courtney Wheeler, who's been awesome at making sure that we have access to the candidates and that we're able to kind of be very transparent and real in our experiences as Black people. One of the things that I do want to tell you guys is about some of the work that we have coming leading up to 2020. One of the main things that we want to do is we want to take those lists and we want to be intentional about reaching those people and ensuring that not only are they registered to vote, not only do they go out and vote for the presidential election, but that they become civic leaders, that they get engaged in places where we know we don't see a lot of us, and that they also take responsibility for what's happening in their community, and that looks like several other things. And we're going to do that through our coalition of 45, 50 different organizations is growing every day. I may have a commitment in my email right now as we speak. But we have several opportunities that we're going to use to engage community members. And as I look around this room, they were very humble when they introduced themselves. They didn't tell you everything that they did. But everyone in this room is an influencer, is a thought leader, and has people that listen to them and follow them. And so what I wanted to do or appeal to you guys is, how do we have more conversations like this around coming together and really, really building a movement that results in some landmark legislation. Hopefully Beto here can help us with that. And some resources being devoted to the issues that we see happening constantly in our community. So the whole purpose for being here was, yes, to bring us together to ask Beto some questions, but for us also to begin brainstorming and thinking about how we do this more often and how we come up with those things that we know we care about within our individual organizations. So I know a lot of these conversations are happening, but again, like I said, a lot of the people in this room, at this table, pretty much everybody in this room is someone who is leading something right now, whether that's in a business sector, in a nonprofit sector, in government space, in the church, in NAACP, like everyone here has something that they're leading, and I just want to make sure that you guys have an opportunity to display that and voice that to Beto.
Let me back up just a hair because I see lots of phones out, and you made this agreement prior to coming in, but I want to just double check. We have some new people come in. Everyone is comfortable with the live streaming, comfortable with the photos. I want to just get advance agreement so that if you're not comfortable, then we can, okay. For those who came in, with some new folks who came in, you are comfortable, okay? Wonderful. So why don't you give us your mission statement? Who are you, and why are you wanting to earn our vote for 2020?
Thanks for having me out and for organizing not just everybody to join us here today, but for all the work that you've done that you just described that is so fundamental to any chance that this country is going to have of being successful and reflecting the potential and the power and the genius of everyone in America. That's in large part why I'm running. We face the greatest set of challenges that this country has ever known. And I look at any dynamic of American life, from the economy, and you mentioned ensuring that it's more inclusive. Folks right now who are working 2 or 3 jobs, cannot find work, don't have the training or skills or access to the education that will allow them to fill the jobs that we're creating. The healthcare system, where people are being consumed by diabetes in the year 2019 because we have not formed a political will to make healthcare universal and accessible to everyone. Climate change, not something we have to prepare ourselves for, but it's happening right now and is disproportionately happening to some communities, typically lower income and majority communities in this country. And yet we're doing nothing to meet the crisis that we face, at least not with the urgency that it demands. What's the answer to all this? It is our democracy and everybody having a chance to participate. What's the challenge with that? The fact that in so many states, yours and mine and Texas included, so many people have literally been drawn out or locked out of the democratic process. In Texas, we had ranked 50th in voter turnout before 2018. And not because we have any less a love of democracy than you do in Tennessee, but based on your race or ethnicity or country of origin, you would be drawn out of a congressional district to diminish the power of your vote or the likelihood that your voice would ever be heard. In Georgia, Stacey Abrams will be the governor of that state, but for the fact that hundreds of thousands of her fellow Georgians were purged from the voter rolls by the same man who was running in the same election, over which he was both the referee and the judge as well as the candidate. the way to meet these challenges is to bring more people in. And so we proposed same day and automatic voter registration that would register more than 55 million additional Americans who are not now participating in the democratic process. We would remove barriers to voting, so a new Voting Rights Act that would stop the voter ID laws, would stop the voter roll purges, would stop the racial gerrymandering, just to name 3 things that are keeping people out of the ballot box. Would make Election Day a national holiday. We would restore confidence in the results of those elections by having paper receipts or paper ballots for every vote cast, so you could audit any election that takes place in this country. End gerrymandering, whereby members of Congress today are choosing their voters instead of the other way around. And get corporate money out of our politics. So no more political action committee contributions, no more special interests, all people all the time. And I love the words, 2 words that you use, accountability and transparency. As a member of Congress, I held a town hall meeting every single month, open to all comers, no holds barred. You could ask any question, make any criticism, and it made me a much better candidate. And there was a healthy dose of fear that I felt going into those meetings. I'm gonna face the people who put me into this position of public trust in the first place and account for how I have done. And that healthy fear that you have of wanting to make sure that you deliver for the people who put you into that position was a prime motivator to deliver for them, and you did. And then the transparency of running a campaign that is open and accessible to everyone. You do not buy your way in. The very fact that you're sitting here around this table is sufficient for us to be able to listen to one another and include your story into our campaign, and I would hope into our administration, and ensure that our service reflects your experience, your expectations, the challenges that you know that you want us to meet. So democracy is at the core of why I'm running, how we're running, and how I think this country is going to fix some of the greatest set of issues that we have ever faced. And so looking forward to listening and learning and applying what I hear here on the campaign trail, and hope it serves to the country. So thank you all for doing this today. And I'll allow you to guide the conversation. I'm here to follow or to answer if I can be helpful.
Good. So I sat and looked at your site and watched lots of videos and had lots of questions, but I'm not going to take up all the time. So I'm going to ask one other question that really I think pulls at me. We're in a very contentious time in our economy. We talked about that in our world. We're in a racist place, a sexist place. We lack of voter, all of these things. We have immigration issues that are happening, but there's also a great deal of us who were forced immigrants to be in this space. Black folks and Native folks who are coming here. How do you think in the first 100 days or even leading up to the election, you'll be able to help bring some of that back together and remove some of that divisiveness so we can all get back on the same, or get on a page? I don't think we're ever on the same book, but get on a page with each other. How does that happen?
I would love for that to be something that you accomplish in the first 100 days. I think it is going to be a more comprehensive, longer, deeper, more involved process, because, as you just said, the wealth and the success and the very essence of this country was built by people who were kidnapped, brought here in bondage, who created what we know as America today, and whose descendants were barred from meaningful participation in that success, not just through Jim Crow and segregation by law, but the de facto suppression and segregation that exists today in 2019, which is manifest in the criminal justice system, but is manifest in the economy, as you said, 10 times the wealth in white America than there is in black America. In education, access and outcomes and disparity of treatment, we know in a kindergarten classroom, an African-American child is 5 times as likely to be disciplined or suspended or expelled as a white child in the same classroom in front of the same teacher for the same infraction. I can only imagine how vulnerable you are at 4 or 5 years old against a system that has designed in some part to keep you down. So how do we meet all of those challenges? The best way to start is the question you just asked, having us talk about this not once we are in office, but long before we are, forcing the accountability that Tequila talked about, that allows us to have a national conversation. Someone pointed out to me that after World War II, everyday average Germans were forced to go to concentration camps and to see where they had attempted to exterminate an entire race. No one could then deny it. I didn't know that was happening. We're going to make you see it. In Rwanda, after the attempted genocide there, Hutus and Tutsis were almost forced or compelled to understand what had just happened in that country. South Africa, after apartheid, a Truth and Reconciliation Commission. In the United States of America, nothing, like literally zero. Not in our history books in any meaningful way, and not in conversations on the debate stage or from the highest executive in the land. So the reparations bill that's been introduced by Sheila Jackson Lee of Houston, I think is at least the right step in the right direction that has that national conversation from our nation's capital and involves everyone, and not just African Americans, but every American in understanding how this country got to where it is today. I believe it is the only path that will allow us the repair that is only just, and the only way that you stop committing this injustice on future generations that follow ours. So that's the way that I think about it and would like to approach it, but am, again, very open to listening to others and receiving their guidance on how to do that.
I'll open it up. Who has our first question? Yes.
You have pulled at my heartstring. My name is Christian Buzz, I'm a member of the MPS School Board, and everything I want to talk to you about deals with gerrymandering. We have 9 school districts, right? In 2020, we'll have the census. In 2021, they'll be doing the calculations, and then a year after that, the State House is going to be redrawing lines. Out of our 9 school board districts, 2 are, 2 of us have half the school system, and a bunch of those students are minority students, Black students, poor students. I want to understand better, what is it that you plan to do to kind of help prevent gerrymandering? How would you support that, especially if there are more conservative members of both the State House, Congress, and every other level of government? And then, of course, anything you have to say around education, around supports for education, resources, funding that's been stripped, I would just love to hear your platform around it.
In answer to your first question, that Voting Rights Act that I'm talking about, not just restoring where we were before the Supreme Court struck down some provisions of the Voting Rights Act, and then Congress inexplicably, for the first time since 1965, failed to come together on a bipartisan basis to restore it, but really looking at some of the most pernicious examples of drawing districts specifically to split communities, to diminish the power of a vote. And I used to be one of those on my high horse who said, if you don't vote, there's something wrong with you. You're not, people have fought and died for this right. How could you? I've since realized by listening to people in Texas, they made a very logical decision based on how diminished their vote had become. They know effectively that vote will not make a difference by design and not by accident. So a new Voting Rights Act takes that into account and removes the power to draw that district away from the office holder and the politician, even if it is ostensibly for partisan advantage, as long as there is a racial or racist component of it, which there is in almost every example that we've discussed today, then you have a Department of Justice mandate to intervene and to protect those voters' ability to express themselves at the ballot box, to divide constituencies. We saw at Prairie View A&M, a world-class historically Black college in Texas, the student body literally divided between 2 different precincts. An inability to early vote on campus. Some of those students led a march of 6 miles to get to the voting place, where they waited 5 hours in order to cast their vote. They were essentially being told by the state not to vote. We're gonna make it so hard on you that you won't. When they transcend that, that's gotta be the inspiration to make sure that we follow with the laws and practices and enforcement that it guarantees that they never have to do that again. Your second question about education, I mentioned the disparity in treatment, which speaks to equity, and the need to ensure that we recruit and retain more public school educators who look like the students in front of them. We proposed a $500 million increase at HBCUs and minority serving institutions, in particular towards recruitment of teachers and paying tuition for teacher training. We've also proposed completely wiping clean any student loan debt for any public school educator who wants to dedicate herself or himself to a career of public service. We're seeing a shortage in public school educators across this country, and I wonder, from your perspective as a trustee of one of the ISDs, that you're seeing that here as well. But there's also a massive funding disparity. So minority majority schools are underfunded to the tune of $23 billion annually in this country. We propose to set up a permanent education fund of $500 billion. Part of that would be spent on addressing this funding disparity as well as the equity challenge that I just described. And two other quick things. One is dropping back the start time universally to pre-K for every child in this country. So instead of 4 or 5 years old, where some kids are already 10 months back in reading comprehension, 3 or 4 years old, so an even start line for every child. And then making sure that we support you as a trustee by fully funding the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, which is $20 billion underfunded from the federal government. When we give you as a trustee those resources, we free up local property tax dollars to pay teacher salaries, invest in deferred maintenance, provide a world-class public school education for those children under your care. And so I think these are some real concrete steps that we could take to address some of the challenges that we've got in public education right now. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yes, ma'am.
Hi.
My name is Denisha Harris.
I'm Beto. Nice to meet
Good
you.
to meet you.
Yeah.
So I'm a biology and psychology double major with a minor in political science student at Tennessee State University right up the street. I'm blessed and fortunate to have a full ride academic presidential scholarship. But unfortunately for a lot of my friends and peers, that is not the case, which means that they have a multitudinous amount of student loans. And so what is your specific policy around student loan forgiveness?
So on forgiveness for the $1.5 trillion in outstanding student loan debt, at a minimum, we will refinance it at the lowest possible interest rates. Right now, the federal government is projected to profit to the tune of $8 billion over the next 10 years on student loan payments back to the federal government. We should not be making a profit, and we should look at that instead as an investment, and I will. And then to the question about education, if you dedicate some part of your career towards public service in a school system, in a VA taking care of veterans who put their lives on the line for this country, in some other way that benefits your community and by extension your country, I want to wipe clean your student loan debt and not do it as we do now in the public service debt forgiveness program after 10 years of on-time payments. We do it in real time on day one, so that you can focus on your career, your ability to pursue your potential, and then deliver world-class service or care or expertise to those whom you serve. And then the other side of this is to stop digging the hole of debt, to make sure that the first 2 years of education are absolutely free for every American, and that a 4-year degree is debt-free completely for middle-income and lower-income Americans. And when we say debt-free, not just tuition, but room, board, and books, the full cost of being able to get higher education. And then last thing, we know that not everyone wants to pursue a college education, so elevating the role of unions, the ability to enter an apprenticeship, to learn a skill or a trade that will allow you to command both a living wage and dignity for the rest of your life, that is part of our proposal as well. So everyone reach their full potential, and we as a country make that investment up front because we understand the return that it's going to produce. Thanks for asking. Appreciate it.
Here now.
But as a follow-up question to that, those pretty lofty goals, and I support that. But how would your administration pay for that? Like you're talking about paying for room and board and books. How would you pay for that?
Yeah, it's not inexpensive, and I think we'd have to be very clear with each other, the American public, that this is a massive investment, but one that will produce a massive return. So if we make some structural changes to the tax code, for example, under the Trump tax cuts, they took the corporate rate from 35% down to 21%. If we move that back up to 28%, we'll generate hundreds of billions of dollars over the next 10 years. If we make another, even more significant change to the tax code, whereby we tax capital at the same rate that we tax ordinary income, you generate additional hundreds of billions of dollars. You can do a better job of capturing the intergenerational transfer of wealth. Right now, with the stepped-up basis, you're really not capturing the value of those assets that were passed on from one generation to the next. Removing that, again, generates much-needed resources and also reduces the gulf between the wealthiest and the poorest at a time of historic wealth and income inequality in this country. So it's both a revenue generator, and I think it makes this economy and democracy a little bit more viable. And then last idea, although revenue is not the principal reason to do this, if we were to end the wars that we've been in Afghanistan for 18 years, in Iraq for 28 years, and in so many other parts of the world, there would be an extraordinary dividend paid back to this country. First and foremost, I want that invested in veterans who born in the battle, but there is then more than enough left over to make additional investments in this country. So those are a few ways that we could pay for this significant investment in people and in their education. Thanks for asking.
First I want to say I was at your rally yesterday and I was totally impressed.
Thank you.
But I want to talk to you or ask you about an issue that's very close to my heart, dear to me. Two of my sons were involved in a mass shooting here in Tennessee at the Waffle House on April 22nd, that was 19. One of my sons survived, the other one didn't. And
Take your time, I'm here to support you.
We all know now that, I have become aware now that gun violence is a health hazard here to us in the United States. Since after my son died, was murdered, I since then started a foundation in his name because he spoke against guns and violence. My question to you is, if you're elected in your first 100 days, what would you do to address the gun violence issue?
Thank you for asking, for your courage. And if I might, what is your son's name?
Akila Silva.
I want to make sure that I'm following your lead on this, that you talk about something that is happening here, that is happening in almost no other place on the planet today, and should force us to ask the question, are we inherently evil or violent as a people? Is there something wrong with us? Or is this a human-caused problem, and is there a human solution to it? And what I've learned from advocates such as yourself is that in those states that have adopted universal background checks and have closed all the loopholes, the Charleston loophole that says after so many days, if you've been unable to do the background check, you can have the gun, no questions asked. The boyfriend loophole, if your significant other has been beating you, committing violence against you, but you do not have a legal relationship, it is immaterial to their ability to purchase a firearm. The gun show loophole, every way in which the gun lobby and manufacturers and the status quo perpetuate a violence that will claim 40,000 lives this year. We have to be stronger than that, less concerned about how this polls or our prospects for the next election, and make sure that we think about your son and you and your commitment to saving the lives of others here in this community. So not only will we sign universal background checks with all loopholes closed into law, we would, and this is a little bit more controversial, especially in my home state of Texas, I can imagine in Tennessee, end the sale of assault weapons and military grade weapons, which were designed simply to kill people, and they're really good at that. They belong on the battlefield and should no longer appear on our streets, in our schools, in public life. And then lastly, red flag laws where someone is displaying a propensity towards hurting themselves or hurting somebody else. There's got to be a deliberate process that protects our rights, but protects everybody else around them as well and stops them before it's too late. I think those are three really serious proposals that I've heard from advocates where there's consensus, not just amongst Democrats, but Republicans and gun owners and non-gun owners alike. So I think that would be a great start for us. And I would love given the fact that you have started this foundation and you are leading on this issue and you're here right now to continue the conversation with you and to have your help, not endorsement for me as a candidate, but your help in breaking through to people who do not see this in the very real terms that you just made all of us see it. So I am grateful to you. Thank you.
Along the same lines of that, I want to ask a question about youth violence. We're seeing it as I'm gonna say a national epidemic. And what are your plans in office to talk about it from a public health epidemic when youth are challenged because of lack of education, lack of access, lack of resources, lack of tools, over policing, lots of different things. I can keep going. I'm sure this room can continue to help me. How do we get youth violence to be seen as a public health epidemic and almost declared as such, so that we can really start to look at it from that perspective and not a bad actor perspective? There's bad kids in the jails. How do we do that?
Yeah, I think you hit on the answer as you were asking the question. The way that we have criminalized entire communities in this country. I just had a chance very briefly in New Orleans to meet Ava DuVernay, who directed 13th, a film that opened my eyes to the fact that
And when they see us.
And when they see us, which is next on my viewing list on Netflix, The Exonerated 5. But not a recent phenomenon that you have 2.3 million people behind bars, a population disproportionately comprised of color. Many there serving time for nonviolent drug crimes, including possession of marijuana. That this has been the pattern and practice of the United States government from its foundation, and certainly since the end of Reconstruction. We in Texas just learned of a mass grave in Fort Bend. They're building a new school, and as they were preparing the land, they discovered these graves of African American men and teenagers who had been in a convict leasing gang for the Imperial Sugar Company, and literally had been arrested just for their labor potential based on the color of their skin, for loitering, for whatever trumped up charges, and were literally worked to death. That when they do the forensic review of the skeletons, they can see that the muscle was literally pulled from the skeleton. So this criminalization of people based on race is something longstanding. It gets to the first question you asked about how we confront this. Some of the more immediate opportunities involve ending the war on drugs completely, expunging the arrest records for those who have arrests for marijuana at a minimum, and perhaps for other nonviolent drug crime offenses. Because as we know, that arrest then forces the person, after they've served time, to check a box on every employment application form going forward. They no longer qualify for student loans. It diminishes their prospects and their opportunities, and their choices become constrained. And so often it is a return to the criminal justice system as perhaps the only avenue of progress forward. So that's a great place to start. Massive reform in policing and the entire criminal justice system. A Department of Justice whose Civil Rights Division is going to vigorously enforce civil rights law and standards. If the local DA or county attorney or state or jurisdiction is unwilling to ensure accountability and justice for police-involved violence or brutality or death, then I really do think it is a fundamental civil rights priority of the United States government, and the resources will be there for it. And then lastly, federal funding to local police departments and sheriff's departments contingent upon full transparency, full reporting on use of force and against whom force is used. Those are some places to start. I don't know that it gets to the basis of the question that you asked, but if I could, I would love to hear from you or others how we meaningfully address that.
Yeah, I want us to think about that, because we need to address the youth part as well as the other part. I saw a hand here, and I'm gonna come back to you.
Yeah, it's my name Larry Turner. I'm with Gideon's Army, which we campus 3728 zip code. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but the 3728 zip code got the highest incarceration rate in America. And what we do is we go in these communities and we build relationships with the people in these areas, and also we educate our people on the law, history, politics, and We also do restorative justice in a local high school here, in which we try to curb the prison, the school to prison pipeline. And we've been having a lot of success in this area because what the teachers do, as opposed to suspending them, they send them to us. And what we do, we hold like conflict and resolution classes, as well as just sit them down and just listen to what's going on, because we know that our people are traumatized, and they, you know, most of them, some of them have been molested, some of them have had brothers and sisters killed, so therefore they deal with a lot of stuff that teachers don't understand. So when we in these spaces, we listen to them, and that's what not taking place. And me personally, I know that you got a prison reform platform, and I received the benefit of the crack law in 2009 and the drug amounts too, because I was sentenced to life in prison in 1997. I did 20 years in federal prison, and since I've been out, I've been doing a lot of positive things in my community, as well as I joined this organization right here because of what they do in our communities. So my question to you is, what would you do for brothers who been in prison a long time, but done changed their lives, the laws is not in place for them to come home? Because what we need is credible messengers in our community that most of our people look up to for what they was doing prior to going to prison.
Right.
But now they done made changes, and the only way they change is gonna be seen is if they brought back out here. So is there anything in your platform for us helping people who are incarcerated, who haven't received no benefit of the new laws that came out or whatever?
Yes, so investing in transition back into the community, their families, into the workforce. I mentioned banning the box earlier, or I didn't say it explicitly, I said there is a box that has to be checked. That box needs to be banned because you have now become, after serving time, consigned to a far different fate, even though you fully paid your price, and it sounds like in many instances, more than paid your price, given the disparity in sentencing and treatment. And I'll just say, I was arrested twice in my early 20s, once for attempted criminal trespass and once for driving under the influence. Neither of those arrests, neither of the times that I spent a night in the county jail defined my opportunities in my life. I now know as I'm older that has almost everything to do with the fact that I'm a white man, and had the privilege to be able to post bail in a cash bail system where many people cannot afford to do that. Had the ability to have some kind of counsel, which many people cannot afford to have effective counsel. So knowing the disparity in who's arrested and what sentences they serve and their treatment, I think you have to not only prevent it on the front end, as I was trying to describe earlier, but as you just suggested, on the back end upon release, a real investment made in people's ability to be successful. And I think my opportunity as a candidate and as president would be to share that that's not just beneficial to the person who's been incarcerated, it's beneficial to this country as a whole. Our economy performs at such a higher level when everyone can participate. Our civic life is so much better when everybody can vote. Things are just so much more possible when we allow people to develop to their full potential. Right now, we are artificially capping people's potential because of their experience. And then last thing, in much the same way that I've answered some of these other questions, given your leadership on this issue, would love to have your help and your guidance to make sure that those policies follow the successes that you've been able to see so far. So would love to keep this conversation going. Thank you.
I'm gonna come here and I got you.
Okay, I just want to kind of build off of what Larry said. I've had a conversation with Larry in meetings early about that. I'm a prosecutor, and it breaks my heart a lot of times when I see defendants coming up courtroom and they look like younger versions of me, you know? And transparently, as a black man, that really irks me. So I want to bring it back to the youth for a moment. What type of policies would you push to provide resources to these kids? Because yes, we are seeing kids, 13, 14, 17. I have one right now, that it was a kid and committed a heinous crime. But the thing about it is, what type of policies would you and your administration push to try to curb this youth violence? Because again, Gideon's Army, what they're doing, they're in the schools trying to curb it, but that's on a local front. From a national front, what would you do?
Yeah.
Let me add, policies and funding.
Yeah.
Because we need
Yes.
the money, so we can fight all the laws and policies and rules, so what money can we also think about as well?
Yeah. I see all this connected. I mean, access to a world-class education. If you're that 4 or 5 year old who's already 10 months back in reading comprehension in kindergarten, your ability to pay attention or see a role for yourself in that classroom in first, second, third grade is really difficult. And you may not see a future for yourself in that school. You may be the child of a single parent who's working 2 or 3 jobs, who does not have the luxury to read to you before you go to bed because she's already on her second shift. So a minimum wage that's at $7.25 in so many other states is part of this issue. Food insecurity, we were just at Second Harvest Food Bank. They were telling me about the tens of millions of meals that they are short in providing just basic nutrition to children in this country. That's part of it. Not being able to see a mental health care provider, so even a social worker, a therapist, much less a psychologist or a psychiatrist, that is part of it. Investment to the dollars that you spoke about, athletics, after school activities, a sense and a purpose and a place for you in your community. That's got to be part of it as well. The criminalization aspect, I don't want to leave that behind because I do think, especially in communities of color, the chance that one of your parents will have been criminally justice involved is many times higher than in the white community in America today. That changes the dynamic in your household and your ability to be literally with your parents and your family. Much of this is going to be driven by policy. Some of it, I mentioned the $23 billion in minority majority school district underfunding is going to be driven by investment, but none of this will be possible unless we follow the lead at the community and at the local level. So from economic inclusion to healthcare to investment in our academics to after school and athletic opportunities, I think all of those are changes that we can make. And then I do think the criminal justice system is such a foundational part of the challenge that we have right now. Having said that, what am I missing and what do you want to see, or what have you seen that's been successful that you would like me to include?
Well, I would like more funding for programs such as Gideon's Army, because when I met with them, one thing that they were lacking that they told me was a lack of resources. And it's one thing, I'll say this, it's a lack of infrastructure as well, because I can go and have a conversation with them as David Jones, the GA, but like, are they having a conversation with my colleagues, you know? Are they being promoted or presented in a way that they can have these conversations? I'm not threatened, but like maybe some of my colleagues, and I don't, maybe I shouldn't say it like this, but what I would say is, you know, sometimes it's hard for one to get a message across if they're convicted felon or whatnot, or you know, Larry might not look like someone that one of my colleagues would normally have a conversation with. I don't know. I don't want to create attitudes or create the appearance that my colleagues are afraid. But what I'm saying is, I feel comfortable in this space. I felt comfortable. It's like I was talking to my brothers when I was, you know, at Procom. So from you, if we get some type of funding, some type of assurance that it's okay to support these local programs, and I understand that, you know, it's a local program, and yes, you know, that money would have to come locally, but some type of national support or some type of infrastructure so that we can push these programs to curb these youth from doing these things. I think a lot of times the youth do these things because of a bad influence, or they just don't know the consequences of their actions. It could be a multitude of things, but I just know that it's a problem to where, I mean, I think all of us are affected by it every day. And to that point, I live in 37207. You know, some of you all have been in my house and y'all know where I live. But what I would say is, a police officer drove by my house the other day, recognized me, and we were just talking. And I like and respect the police I think it's important. I think they're important, but I don't want us to have the attitude as if we're criminalizing everyone just because. And while nothing was mentioned about race, you know, I certainly kind of gathered that because of the neighborhood that I lived in. And I just don't want to be looked at as, oh, that's David, he's a DA, he's one of the good ones, you know?
So here's what I would say is, I think you asked an important question that at the very end, we should all go around and be able to answer, which is, what is it that you'd like to specifically ask or contribute, so that Beto can be thinking about that as he's going on. And then I also want to make sure that the violence interrupters part of what you're talking about, that you actually talk about that a little more explicitly. Because to David's point, I believe what could happen is that a local program could become a national initiative.
Yes.
Because some of these programs already have some of the strong partial infrastructure, and all they need is just the additional piece. But it's also, we know that it works. We've seen it work. It's been very effective. So I have Keith, Ashley, Charlene.
Okay, my name is Keith Collins,
And
I'm
then-
president of the Nashville NAACP. And this question is around the youth also and violence. I'm thinking about, there's a camp going on right now, Marcus Campbell has over at Mount Carmel. He's got about 200 kids there. He's 100% over capacity. These are children that live in public housing. So when I was a youth, we had summer youth programs that paid you to do like a CETA program. I'm a little older than you. You all remember that?
Yeah.
And so when we talk to these young folks and you say take the pack or take the gun out of your hand, we don't have anything to put back into the hand. Now, we have a crumbling infrastructure right now, and so we actually could do, that's the second question, around what are we doing around infrastructure, and then could we have these youth take on apprentice type programs to get a skilled trade and living wage jobs and access to that, because it's a financial piece to that. So no matter, a lot of those kids, that's the only hot meal they get is at that camp. So that's the real existential crisis that we're in. And so how would you begin to maybe speak to that?
Yeah, I love everything that you just suggested. Going back to Second Harvest Food Bank today, they talked about how hard it is to get nutrition and calories to kids after the school year has ended. Because if you were on free and reduced breakfast and lunch, you're no longer going to that school every day to get that meal. So how do we get that meal out to you? And having those calories and being confident and secure in the meal that you get is fundamental to everything else that you're going to be able to do. Having the purpose that you just described in a job or an apprenticeship or learning a skill or a trade, you know, I just know in my life, I've always felt so much more confident when I mastered something and I have something to contribute back. And I feel like I'm part of society or my neighborhood or my community in a contributing way. Making a federal investment in that, and even if that federal investment is made to the state of Tennessee or the community of Nashville, and then local community decides these are the programs that really work, from Gideon's Army to perhaps some skills or trade-based apprenticeship program, that makes a tremendous amount of sense to me. And especially if it's looked at in contrast to the expense for criminal prosecution or police enforcement, or some of the violence that we're seeing right now. You said, we're gonna ask you to take that gun out of your hands, but what else are we going to put in? What are we gonna replace it with? I don't think we can replace it with good intentions or lectures. I think there has to be a solid investment in an alternative. And again, from the camps, the after-school activities, to the apprenticeships, to maybe some universal expectation of public service that is not just public service, you know, that relies on you to step up, but public service that you are paid for during the course of your day. That's an investment well worth making. Again, I think one common thing I'm taking from this is the resources and the overarching policy can be provided by the federal government, but unless it is designed and led by the local community, I wonder at the success of it. But I see the leadership here that we're looking for. So I like that idea a lot.
We've got about 10 more minutes, so Ashley, Charlene, and then Christian.
So I am a small business owner, and I'm the chair of our local Leaders Minorities Advisory Council, and I got to help lead this initiative called Contracting for Equity Tennessee, where I got to hear from and work with a lot of small business owners across the state around their frustrations and their concerns about how they set up their business in a way that they can thrive, take care of their families. And a lot of the frustrations that I hear are around access to capital, access to credit, and then for those businesses that want to do this with a government entity, there are a lot of loopholes and barriers that prevent them from being able to succeed.
Right.
Being prepared to get those government contracts that may provide some sort of sustainability for their business. Can you talk a little bit more about how you plan to, give half federal contracts to small business owners? Do you plan to expand the AA program? What does that look like? Because I know right now there are only 31 businesses in the state of Tennessee that are AA certified. So can you talk to me a little bit about what your plans for small business owners?
Let's start with where you did and get more capital out into the community. We're organized as a capitalist economy, and if you do not have access to that, you just are not going to be successful. So we will double the size of the community development finance institutions that make small business loans to entrepreneurs who otherwise would not be able to access credit or capital. We will then make a much larger investment in the state grants that turn those over to credit and lending institutions in Nashville, El Paso, Texas, my hometown. You just hit on something else that we need to do, which is we procure hundreds of billions of dollars at the federal level every year. Our administration will move $50 billion of that procurement to small businesses, and half of that will be minority-owned and women-owned businesses in this country. So with that contract for that service or product that you provide, you're then able to have the cash flow that allows you to expand, hire more people, and provide services to other clients as well. And then lastly, I want to mention the racial dynamic of this. When I started a small business 20 years ago, I went to the bank for a loan, was denied. We were starting a technology business. I had no collateral to pledge against that loan. But my dad and mom, who had a home that they had been paying the mortgage on and had it fully paid for, had the equity, took out a loan against that and then lent that back to me, $20,000. I could start that business. We know through redlining and through mortgage lending practices over the last 100 years in this country that we've denied so many in this country from building equity against which they can borrow. So I think we have to more than make up for that by vastly expanding these programs as we propose to do in our administration, and then not just expanding them to all small business owners universally, but specifically targeting to minority-owned and women-owned. And then on the 8A part of this, I want to make sure I get you an intelligent answer. I know from serving on the Hispanic Chamber of Commerce Board of Directors, and one of our primary missions was certification and then contracts for 8A businesses. The loopholes or the hoops through which you have to jump, and the loopholes that some are able to exploit and others are not. We've got to make this fair to everyone involved, and so I want to make sure that we take a look at the 8A program and come back to you with some intelligent answers about how we make that better. Thanks for asking the question.
I have so many follow-ups, but
And I was gonna say that one of the pieces that I think is also thinking, how do we educate the hirers, the procurement agents, about even hiring, even giving money, spending money with us, allowing us to be that quality business. So I know that's something that Ashley is working hard on. Charlotte, you have a question?
Yeah, this is probably a sexy topic, but I just had a baby 4 weeks ago, so this is sort of fresh on my mind. But this is a question about medical debt. I feel like it's something that keeps the middle class down, that keeps us down economically, and hinders us from being able to be mobile economically. So my two-part question is, what are you doing about medical debt? Because I feel like healthcare companies screw us over in paying premiums, we pay co-insurance, we pay co-pays, a deductible, and then you send me a bill in the mail. But they get millions of dollars in government subsidies. So I do not believe that they should be getting it both ways. So what are you gonna do about that to help us consumers? And then having had a baby, I'm on maternity leave now. Thankfully, my job is one of the few that provides partial paid maternity leave, but a lot of us don't get that. So will you have a plan to have parental leave, paid parental leave to start a family?
First of all, congratulations. On paid family leave, the answer is yes, universal for every family in this country. Taking care of yourself or your child or a parent should not penalize you at the risk of losing your job or your income. And it does for tens of millions of our fellow Americans. And so universal paid family leave is critical, and we will get that passed and signed into law. On healthcare, if you have insurance that is insurance in name only, it's not guaranteed that you're gonna get the care because you may not be able to bridge that deductible. Or that copay is so out of your ballpark to meet that you're not going to even have the procedure or fill the prescription, or that premium's going up every year. In our administration, you will be able to enroll in Medicare and not have to worry about any of that in order to be able to get the care that you need. If you have employer-sponsored insurance that you like, works for you, if you're a member of a union and you fought for an insurance package, and maybe you did it in lieu of higher wages or other benefits, and you want to keep that, our plan would preserve choice, and you would have the ability to keep that plan. But I strongly believe that by introducing Medicare as a competitor, you will drive down the price and the cost and these practices. Insurance companies have an overhead of something like 16 or 17% for the advertising, the outrageous salaries, the profits that are paid out. Medicare has an overhead of, I think, 2% right now. So that efficiency is going to be incredibly competitive and will force prices to come down. And we should never put someone in debt for having a child, for taking care of their diabetes, for curing the cancer that would otherwise consume them. And yet that's what we do in this country right now. We're the wealthiest place on the planet. We have the resources to do this. We just have to make a decision that we want to. And I've decided that I really want to make sure that this country leads on this and delivers on this. So thanks for asking. Appreciate it.
I think we have one more question. Over here.
Yeah.
Okay. Mrs. Turner, and I'll come back to you, and then LaDonna, you'll be last. So we gotta go quick. Real quick.
Real quick.
Come on, Pastor.
Quick question. I ain't doing further. We heard a lot of issues that
We'll wait. They can't give you a try. Maybe we can talk about that. Infrastructure. Okay, Pastor Turner,
so
what you
keep
got?
it two-part. Heard the platform today and previously up to this point. I heard a lot of the great ideas that we have here. I know we can pretty much solve our problems, but it takes funding to do that. First question will be, what's the commitment if you get elected or if not, you stay and see the Congress? What's the commitment to kind of help what we know we can do in our community?
Right.
Have that commitment to help fund and have the infrastructure to help us solve problems. Then on the second one will be, we know a lot of these things that we were talking about that are affecting the African American community has been policy and laws from day one, from post-slavery, that we still see today. And some needs to be reversed. We talked about the criminal laws and all those things, education, redlining, all those things that are distinctly for African Americans to help us be what is voice suppression. And I like the platform of trying to change those things. So what can we do realistically to try to see that get done? And from sitting, having to go through your political experience, does protesting work? Black and brown and white coming, does it work? What needle does that move to get policies that I love to hear? I want to see Betty race. I want to see redlining just go away and get erased. I want to see the true democracy that you talked about, but it takes policy and it takes law coming from the president on down. What can we do? Does it work? We protest. Do we need to go back to boycotting from the 60s to make that happen for the black and brown community to move the needle until, because it's going to take some years. I'm hearing what you're saying. Very aggressive. I'm not being a devil's advocate, but it's going to take a little time. It's going to take going across the aisle to Republicans to get them on board. Realistically, time frames. And in the meantime, what can we do as grassroots organizations, civil rights organizations, if we get together and have a lot of people, does that move the needle realistically? And if it doesn't, what does to get the attention, to get Republicans and the Democrats on one accord, to do what is right to reverse some of these laws that affect the African American community, so we can move the needle while we wait.
Yeah.
You
So
know.
I can reverse the policies, and then what can we do at the local level to make sure we support that or push you all into submission?
Yeah. Into submission, I like that. I think what you asked is the only way this is gonna happen. It is the only way, because the changes are too massive, and the challenges are too monumental to hit this piecemeal, or if we wait, climate is just one of them. If you waited 10 years to get to an answer, you would have lost the last decade we had left to address this before it was too late. And so it's interesting, we just on the 3rd of July celebrated the 55th anniversary of the Civil Rights Act. And as great a man as JFK was for introducing it, or LBJ was for signing it into law, neither of them really had a whole lot to do with it. They became the channel for it because it was forced upon them. And I love the word you said, submission. They had to respond to the freedom riders, the bus boycotts, the campaigns in Birmingham, in Montgomery, that iconic picture of 3 teenagers pinned against a wall by a fire hose. You know, they're fighting a fire that will never go out. It shocked and galvanized this country's conscience, and it forced the hand of those legislators from the South voting for a Civil Rights Act, knowing, and Johnson knew this, he said, we have lost the South forever. Here we are today, just beginning to emerge from what we thought was just a solid red bulwark against any kind of progress, and I'm confident we're going to transcend that. But I think that would have only happened because of that. And on the issue of gun violence, I know it's going to be you, and it's going to be moms who demand action, and those students who are marching for their lives, and your son, who are going to force this country to act on every single issue. So I don't care who the next president is, how resourceful, powerful, commanding, or strong, if there's not a movement that forces that change, you just will not have it. And so yes, those protests work, and I'll tell you, as a former member of Congress, we listened. And I mentioned going to those town hall meetings, when folks were organized or angry or excited against or for something, that was never lost on me. And it may not have always decided the issue for me. I always, was going to be true to my conscience and what I thought was best for the country. But it would certainly tell me what was a priority for my constituents. I think that was the answer to your question that you gave in your comment, and I appreciate you for saying that, because that's what we need at this moment. Thank you.
Okay. I kind of share a lot of views here also, but I come from a cultural background. I'm a recipient of American University. I don't know if you know what that means. I came here knowing that I was going to be a citizen in a certain number of years. So I got my green card from back home. And I hear this president already talks about immigrants and how he dislikes immigrants. From my perspective, and the people I know who benefited from that program, I think all of them are doing very well here in the States. And because I lead such group as cultural group, and a bigger group also, it worries me when I hear leader of the free world coming out openly, specifically about immigrants, the way he talks about them, not recognizing the contributions of these people in this society. So the question is, if you become the leader of the free world, what will you do differently with such a program as American Diversity? It involves bringing people from other cultures
Yes.
to fill the gap in this society.
I will speak about it with pride. I will speak about it from the perspective of a community in El Paso where I live, a quarter of whom are people who are born in another country. And what I remind myself is that they had to leave their home and their family their culture, their country, and start again as strangers in a strange land. And to do better for themselves, but also because they were called to do better for us, and they have. And their very presence has made us stronger and more successful. And despite what Trump has said and who he wants to make us afraid of, El Paso, Texas today is one of the safest cities in the United States of America. If you ask our DA or our police chief or our sheriff, he'll tell you it's because we're a city of immigrants. And when we treat people with respect and dignity, they come forward to report crimes or make the community stronger because they see themselves in the future of our town. They want it to be strong and to do well. And so the rhetoric that we use, when he calls, the countries of Africa shithole nations, or he says Mexican immigrants are rapists or criminals, asylum seekers are an animal infestation, Klansmen are very fine people. He has made it permissible for people to be hateful and to use violence against one another. We've seen every single one of the last 3 years hate crimes on the rise. He signs the executive order trying to ban Muslim travel. That day, the mosque in Victoria, Texas was literally burned to the ground. You don't get kids in cages on the US-Mexico border unless you've given those agents permission to treat them as something other than a human being. So I'll just tell you that I understand exactly what you said, that his language, it doesn't just offend us, it changes us. It changes who this country is. So I'll speak with pride, but I'll also make sure that our policies and practices reflect the fact that immigration is perhaps the best problem, if you want to call it a problem, that we could possibly have. It's one of the greatest strengths America has ever known. So I'll make sure that that's reflected in the actions that we take. So thank you for sharing that. Appreciate that.
We have one last question with Rosanna. As she is, okay, so but I'm gonna go back to you. So as she's doing her question, think about your one request. What's your thing that you want to make sure that Beto leaves knowing, so that we can wrap it up in a bow and get a nice photo? Just for the photo. Okay, Rosanna.
Well, good afternoon. Thank you again so much for being here. It's great to hear some of your thoughts and views on all the issues that we've talked about. So my question is specifically around economic development and how that pertains to community banks. As we've thought about the issues addressed here today, whether it's access to capital for small businesses, whether it's how do I pay for education, how do I become a homeowner, and so many other things that are considered the American dream. Oftentimes community banks can be of assistance in those areas. However, there's a huge war on community banks, especially as it pertains to the competition between smaller community banks, especially black banks, and the larger banks like Bank of America, SunTrust, so on and so forth. So my great-great-grandfather was one of the founders of Citizens Savings Bank and Trust, which is literally a couple of minutes down the street on Jefferson Street. We are the oldest black-owned financial institution in the country, but there's so many regulatory issues, so many issues with capital and so on and so forth that it makes it hard to continue to compete in this economic environment. So what are some of your thoughts on strengthening community banks and what resources would your presidency provide?
Yeah. So you used the phrase community development, and we were talking about economic development earlier. In our administration, we will double the size of community development finance institution funding to make sure that more capital gets out into the community. We're talking about small business formation and growth earlier. Capital is obviously fundamental to it, and community banks are closest to the entrepreneurs who can make that happen. You know the people in the community far better than Wells Fargo or Bank of America or any other large or multinational financial institution ever will. And so let's make sure that we're giving you that power to connect the capital, the lending with the people who can make the most out of it. Let's also address the other side of this, which is you had the most significant recession since the Great Depression in 08 and 09 because of the malfeasance and fraud and the bad actions of large corporate financial institutions. The response to that, Dodd-Frank and other controls to make sure that we don't ever put this country at risk systemically because of the actions of a few, were by and large the right response. To the degree that they made it harder for community banks and lenders to do their job, community banks and lenders who had no role whatsoever in producing that financial crisis, then we've got to be able to account for that. As a member of Congress, I tried to make sure that we held those who are responsible, accountable, and prevent them from ever causing this kind of loss and devastation again, but that we didn't unnecessarily and unwittingly punish community lenders such as yourself for the bank that you just referenced that your family started. We can probably do a better job of that, of making sure that we prioritize community lending. So we'll do that both in the amount of money that we bring in through CDFIs, and then also to the tune of tens of billions of dollars direct state grants, and then the state of Tennessee then allocates that community capital and lending. And then on the regulatory side, make sure that you've got a seat at the table to make sure that we're not keeping you from being able to get capital in the hands of those who can really use it, while not relieving the pressure from the big corporations who have the power to bring this economy down to its knees as they did before. So those would be the two sides of it that I'd look at. And again, would love for you to be at the table because you're closest to this opportunity and to this challenge. And so would love to have your help in forming the policies that would follow. Thanks for asking.
Okay, so as we begin to wrap, I'm gonna start with my request to go this way. That way Takula can end the conversation and then do your thank yous and you can get to your next engagement. I have lots of requests as a small business owner, but I think in the spirit of Union's Army being represented in the room, what I would ask is for you to consider what it looks like for small nonprofits led by people of color to get support locally, but also think about the national structure that they could potentially bring. When I think about the Violence Interrupters program, which you can explain later, Larry, when I think about that program and that it was founded on the principle of health, an epidemiologist was the one who looked at it and said violence in our communities is really a disease, and how do we look and make sure that that disease does not continue to spread? And so I'd like to see you look at programs like Union's Army as a national initiative that we know has worked because it's piloted in a zip code. We know we can put that in micro communities across the country, and really be able to see our people be able to take back their communities, which communities are made up of people and not just developers building neighborhoods. So that's my request.
Thank you.
Shortly, I would just say student loan forgiveness and reparations.
I mean, same fight since post-slavery, there's no equality. So change those, we can change those policies historically and talk about new ones as we go forward in the generation.
Thank you.
Mohammed, you're back there, but I saw you come in. Do you have okay, do you have a request that you'd like for Beto to take back and think about?
Yeah, so thank you so much. Earlier I wanted to use the horn and I co-own that coffee shop, but thank you for coming by. But I feel like kind of in this space of black men in America, also first generation immigrant, and I think generally looking based on all these issues that's been discussed, I see a bigger worry that is going on in this country. So I've been living here in the South, in Georgia and Tennessee, the past 2 decades, and now for newly arrived first generation immigrant, whether they're black or whatever color they are, is this they want to have to have mobility, but the kind of rhetoric that's been kind of coming out of White House these past few years is completely have scared communities out to the point that they're not participating in the economy or even in the community. And I'm someone who's highly interested in participating in the civic life of my community and organize my community around that. So it's been hard. So it's really refreshing to hear that you're very familiar with your community that's very similar to here in Nashville. So my question for you is that what kind of message of unity that we have in this country that you have generally speaking, other than these specific issues?
So what I'll do is he answered that a little bit earlier. So I'll flip it just a little bit to say what we want to hear from you as you continue through the trail is to really think about how you can unify our communities, so that we can start to stand beside each other, sometimes equally, and move forward to really unify. Thank you, Mohammed. Rob, did you have a question that you want Beto to take back, or a request of what he can take back as he continues his journey?
Question, more or less a statement.
Yes, that's it.
Is just on
it shouldn't be this 2019. It should be statements like, it's twice as hard to be black and 3 times as hard to be a black male. And we can make intentional efforts just to, make things equal. Just make things fair. Everybody says this country is built on freedom and equality, but until you have walked in the shoes of African American, black, I don't think those statements are held true, because it's not, and I feel like that this country should make more intentional efforts on celebrating black. Everyone has their, we're intentional on how we treat different ethnicities, and most ethnicities have got reparations and stuff, but we're intentional on how we treat just even the LGBT community. We're very intentional on that, and we're very more active on that. But I don't see that same type of effort when it comes to how we treat African Americans as a whole. I don't see that. And it's just, to me, I think that coming into 2020, it would be good to have a country that really intentionally cared for blacks, or made intentional efforts to say, we're going to celebrate black culture. We're going to find ways to uplift blacks, and even get rid of the whole minority statement where we get a piece of, in most businesses, they have to give minorities a piece because we know it's unfair, right? So it's like you have to give some to minorities, but they made the minorities to mean women now, and it can mean white women, and it can be the wife of a white man. So it's like we have to make rules just to be treated fair, because fairness is so unequal. So it's like let's try to make the country really.
Okay. Thank you, Rob. Okay, listen, I know
I'm
that
gonna
everybody
be
here
quick,
is
super
I'm gonna
quick.
say everybody here is a orator, but let's give a 15 seconds.
No, 56. So I just want you to unify the base. I feel like the base is all over the place, and ununified, we're not going to be Donald Trump. So I just feel like the party needs to come together and figure out that one voice, one sound, one message type of delivery. Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, they got a lot of reaction.
Mine is all about pipeline development. When it comes to the city process, being an elected official, being even a member of a nonprofit board, often African Americans are overlooked because we just don't know about it. We're not in the networks, we're not in the cool kids groups, we're just developing pipelines for that.
Great. Thank you.
And I would say creating opportunities for women of color in leadership positions locally. How can we take that to a national platform?
And I'm particularly would say black women.
Yes.
Black, yes.
There's so many questions or issues. My thing is, we were invited to Capitol Hill when they passed the background checks bill. How are you gonna, I don't know, what are you gonna do? Because it's so frustrating to think about, it's up there with the senators. How are we gonna get it passed as a law? What are you gonna do? Like, it's frustrating to think about the storage of guns and background checks.
Right.
It's gun violence is such a big issue, and it's sad to know that a lot of people that I talk to, especially in the black community, they don't come out and say we accept it and it's the norm. Oh my God, well, gun violence became the normal thing. I don't want people to feel that because it's not normal. It's not okay.
Right.
So what I hear her saying is, will you be bold enough to make a real gun reform or gun control law and policy and funding structure so that we can cease the violence? That's what I hear you saying, Mom. Okay. Yes, sir.
I guess my request would be to continue to have events like this. Like, I can't speak for every single black person. All of us from different walks of life. And for us all to be capable to move up together, you're gonna have to listen to every different one. So I can't speak for everybody, but that is my main question.
Thank you.
Okay, just briefly, it's 20 of y'all, right? So if you can just distinguish yourself as to why you should definitely be the nominee, and I think that goes without saying. But then also, I just don't want to, come November 2020, I don't want to have to vote for you if you're the nominee, because you're going against Trump. But I want to vote for you because I know that you are going to, you have an interest in doing what's best for all people, including African Americans, so that we definitely have a seat at the table, and not
It's not enough to define yourself by what you're against or who you're against. What are you for?
Yes.
Yeah.
Listen,
Yeah.
you and him, listen, let me see. Increased capacity building and access to credit and capital for micro enterprises owned by women and ethnic minorities. Ethnic minorities is the key word.
I was listening to Tanya House and Coates. He was on Democracy Now! He had done the congressional. He said that Joe Biden cannot out-white man Donald Trump. And I would hope that you wouldn't try to out-white man him. And that you would actually go the other direction by bringing the brutal legacy of white supremacy front and center. You mentioned Germany and the conversations that they had after the Holocaust. It was easy for them to have because there were no Jews there. So, but we're still here. So the conversation has to be in light of this horrendous set of conditions, but yet the people are still here who were. So I just love for you to bring that front and center, and I think that's going to be the shift. That's how you can distinguish yourself.
Thank you.
Well, this is a takeaway. I want to lean towards her. I'm a businesswoman. There's some requirements that the city, the state requires of me before I can even say. Guns are not being anywhere in this country. What I want to say is, if I don't make it, just like they make me do as a businessman, requiring some kind of bonding and insurance, if you're going on in this country, you're responsible for it. You have to buy some kind of insurance. So when you carelessly shoot somebody, it should be at a cost.
Makes sense. Thank you.
As a violence interrupter here in Nashville, which we police our community, I ask that you, because what we try to do is stop retaliation out the gun fire, somebody get shot. And my question to you is, or what I ask of you is to put something in place. I don't know if you're familiar with Black Identity Extremists.
Yeah.
Yes, that's where it's a program that the federal government put in place in 2017, in which what they are doing is targeting activists who speak out against police brutality or who have strong identification with their race. And I just ask you to look into that and protect us activists who are here in our community, trying to, bring forth some type of love and some type of peace in our communities. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
All I wanna say is, if you become the president, don't forget about it. Don't come to the communities and have conversation because you want our vote, and then once you're elected, and then you forget about it. So,
Thank you. Yeah, absolutely.
Creating economic pathways to the middle class, so raise the minimum wage to the livable wage. May not be 15, but make sure it's livable for everyone.
Thank you. Yes.
So I have a couple of questions. They're gonna be fast. One, how many Black people are in your staff?
More than I can name off the top of my head. So, senior communications, Ophira, our South Carolina State Director, Lauren, our Texas Director, Delilah, are three really prominent positions that come to mind right now, all African American women. Cynthia Cano, who's our travel chief, who was here, who's been a leader in our campaign from the outset as Mexican American woman on the campaign. But yes, very important to our team.
That was an important question to me. My second question is, all of these issues are very great and you have a very good platform, but I want to know how you're going to work with those Republicans in Congress to get this passed. Because we know that as the president, you can sign stuff into law, but Congress can come and
Yes.
hit you with the Obama Medicare thing. So we want to make sure you don't spend your whole presidency, because I believe that the good candidates are going to rise to the top, fighting this partisan fight with the mess of a Democratic Party backing you up, but that you're actually intentional about building relationships across the aisle and actually getting some of this stuff passed. So, you have a plan for that?
I do.
I can get an email.
Yeah, well, part of it is, people mentioned succession planning and talent pipeline. I think that also holds true for politics. So state rep races, city council races, school board races, and certainly races for the United States Senate, United States Congress have to be a priority right now, because what we're talking about doing is really going to be more possible when you have a majority with whom you can work. And right now, Mitch McConnell in the Senate, who made his singular purpose defeating Barack Obama instead of advancing the interests of this country, it's going to be very hard for us to work with him. So making him the Senate minority leader or replacing him altogether is absolutely critical.
Okay, I have several other questions, but I'll say that my ask is, as an African American woman who leads a Black-founded, Black-led organization, we know that we get 3% of all national funding that goes towards the exact same work we do in our communities as led by white people. So I want to charge and challenge you that if you win, if you don't win, you're going to land somewhere good, and all these national funders and organizations are going to be coming to you saying who's doing the civic engagement work. Write down the Equity Alliance and do the work.
As we wrap up, you have any final things that you want us to hear from you? And then I also will, like, as soon as he gets done talking, I'd ask everybody to get over in front of the Lab Nashville sign, and let's get a photo, and then he has to get out of here to his next event, okay? So, any last things you'd like to say?
I just want to say thank you to you for organizing, facilitating the conversation, Keila, for making all this possible, for the work that everyone is doing, and for the very real accountability that you're bringing to this conversation. I know that any support that I would have would be earned. Any success would be earned, and the path towards earning that begins with these conversations and understanding what the expectations are, and then being able to deliver to them. And so just know that I will do everything in my power to earn that support and your vote and your help if in office, to make sure that we can enact this incredibly ambitious agenda, and would count on the leadership and guidance at the community level to make sure that we can get enacted. So thank you all. Just very grateful for the time. Appreciate it. Yeah.
Okay, leave your things, and let's all go and drink it up. Please.